Big news out this week about the Horse River Wood Buffalo wildfire. Now, that's the fire that triggered the single largest evacuation in Canadian history, when nearly 100,000 people were evacuated on what seemed like a moment's notice from Fort McMurray, Alberta, and 2,000 structures in the northern Alberta community were either burned or damaged by the fire. A new report on the fire, commissioned by the Alberta government, was just leaked out to the CBC. The worst part, the NDP had this report in their hands since March, and they didn't release it. They actually asked MLAs to vote on their budget that included funding for wildfire management without letting any of them or any of us see this report. You see, the NDP were trying to let the clock tick down on the legislature until they could go on their summer break and enjoy themselves and never be held responsible for what this report says. And the report is damning. There are actually two reports. I'm going to go through them one by one, page by page for you over the coming days. The first report was done by MNP, that's an independent auditing firm on behalf of the Alberta government, and the second report was done by KPMG, also an independent auditing firm on behalf of the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo. And I'll get to that report next because there's just so much in this first report to get through. But here are some of the highlights, or rather disgusting lowlights, from the MNP Horse River Fire Report. The report said wildfire hazard conditions throughout northern Alberta were severe and known to be severe in early 2016. And you'll remember the NDP cut the fire budget that spring, knowing full well. And with regard to the fire, the wildfire itself was not an anomaly, and though extreme, the fire behavior exhibited was predictable. The Horse River fire burned from 2 hectares on May 1st to 10,000 hectares by May 5th. In the air on May 1, 3 days before it hit Fort McMurray, Ag and Forestry had air tankers on alert in Lac La Biche, Slave Lake, Whitecourt, Edson, and Peace River, but there were none positioned to deal with this fire in Fort McMurray. On the ground, the report said that there is limited evidence that contingency plans were being developed and implemented during the first 36 hours to contain or minimize the damage. It also said there was a considerable delay in mobilizing heavy equipment from the time the wildfire started on May 1st. Opportunities to build contingency lines or control lines through the first 24 hours, including night operations, were not even carried out. So by the time the bulldozer guard construction started, it was already in the heat of the day on May 2nd. Too late. The fire would hit town the next day. You see, Notley told us Fort McMurray had all the assets they needed, but it's clear Ag and Forestry either didn't have them or they weren't deploying them properly. The report also shows total chaos and a total communications breakdown between the provincial government and the municipal disaster response team, to the point where people could have been killed. This is also directly from the report. It says, the connection between Ag and Forestry organization and the municipal resources never achieved unified command as described by Incident Command System Canada. What this means, you guys, is that they weren't following already laid out communications procedures for emergencies as they happen here in Canada. But this is what I think is by far the worst. Again, I'm going to read directly from the report. You won't believe this. By late morning on May 3rd, the Agriculture and Forestry's operations chief realized the wildfire was beyond the ability of firefighting resources and would run into Fort McMurray that afternoon. Okay, let's just stop right here for a second. That's the Alberta government's operations chief for the fire. That's their guy. Let's continue. On the municipal side of the incident, another operations chief was deployed to the Regional Emergency Operations Center. Rather than learning about the wildfire's imminent incursion into Fort McMurray through the Incident Command System structure, the Regional Municipality of Wood Buffalo Operations Chief discovered the wildfire was in the community through public reports over social media. As it turns out, the RMWB Operations Chief's connection to the wildfire operation was through the Deputy Duty Officer at the Fort McMurray Forest Area Office, 2 or 3 steps removed from the Operations Chief on the Agriculture and Forestry side of the incident. This is not consistent with the unified command structure under ICS, which calls for 1 Operations Chief or 2 Operations Chiefs working in unison. What this means is that Ag and Forestry knew in the morning that the fire would burn into town, but the Regional Municipality of Wood Buffalo Operations Chief found out in the afternoon that the fire was already in town from Facebook or Twitter. And only then an evacuation was ordered at 4:20 that afternoon. They had a full day of knowing the fire was headed into town, and they didn't order an evacuation until after the work day, 5 or 6 hours later. Kids were at school, parents were at work, pets were abandoned. It is a miracle, an act of God that no one died in that fire. An entire city had moments to evacuate when the Ag and Forestry Operations Chief, again, that is the provincial government's operations chief, knew the whole damn day. Just listen to this question from the press conference the NDP were forced to hold. The NDP's Shay Anderson and O'Neill Carlier couldn't give a straight answer about if the evacuation order should have happened sooner. Just listen to this.
Did officials wait too long to evacuate Fort McMurray?
You know what? We had talked to the REOC early on. The communication was basically constant. So I can't speak to what happened on the ground there. I wasn't there at the time. But when those types of things happen, there was a phased evacuation that was ongoing, right? And they thought at the time, and they did the best they could, they thought that was going to work. Well, they realized quite quickly, as we all did, that the fire was a lot bigger than we all thought and was moving a lot faster. So that's why they made that decision on the ground to go north and south. So that was the main reason for that.
The answer is yes. For the love of God, yes. 100,000 times over, yes. The second they learned the fire was going to breach town, everyone should have been ordered out. I mean, Carlier and Anderson, they've had 3 months of hiding this report to come up with some good excuses for this, but there just aren't any. Carlier and Anderson are trying to protect the province for how they bungled the fire response, and they were never going to show you these reports. The NDP have politicized this report by trying to hide it. They use the tragedy of an entire Alberta city for their own political expediency. Fort McMurray just wanted answers, but they weren't ever going to get them because the answers would hurt the NDP. The NDP were going to pride themselves and the government on being the heroes of the fire and take credit for fixing any issues instead of being shown to be the architects of chaos that could have killed someone or several people. Rachel Notley called Brian Jean a fearmonger for wondering where the heck the water bombers were. But now we know there just weren't any. I'm staying on this story like I have since the very beginning because I have so much more to tell you. I've got another 167 pages of documents to go through at least in this other report, and I'll bring you the most important parts again. For the Rebel.media, I'm Sheila Gunreid. Fund my independent investigation into the government's bungling of the disaster response in Fort McMurray. Go to whatissshehiding.ca and donate today.